So, I want to talk now about ethics, and I want to offer you 3 ways of thinking of it. Ethics can be rule-based, so that might mean deontological ethics like Kant, which is essentially a philosophical version of the thou shalt nots that you find in religious traditions, so in the Old Testament. So you have lots of rules, and the challenge in ethics is to know what the rules are and how to apply them. But I also think of utilitarian as rule-based. It's just that there's only one rule, and that is maximize utility. So the question with ethics is always, how do you apply the rule? I mean, Kant famously thought that there are these absolute rules, so you should never tell lies, according to Kant. The trouble is, it's easy to think of cases where you should tell a lie. So the Gestapo want to know where the Jews are, and and they ask you. It doesn't seem to be the highest morality to just tell the Gestapo where the Jews are, when you know that the Gestapo are just going to go there and seize your Jewish neighbours and carry them off to death camps, saying, yes, but the categorical imperative tells me that I should never lie. Doesn't seem quite good enough. There are particular problems with Kant's ethics too. If you think about the universalizability test, supposing my maxim is that I'm always going to shake hands with people using their favoured hand, right? So I've decided that I want to be polite. I shake hands with everybody I meet. This is after we get the vaccine, of course, that we'll do this. I shake hands with everybody I meet, and I shake hands with their favoured hand. So if I meet a left-handed person, I shake their left hand. If I meet a right-handed person, I shake their right hand. Now, this is a perfectly possible maxim for me, but it's not universalizable. And if you think about it for a minute, you'll see why. It's not possible for everybody to follow this rule at the same time. But it doesn't seem to be that it's not immoral, right? So the mere fact that you can't follow a rule doesn't show that it's that you've discovered some immorality. At the same time, there are some things that seem to be immoral, that as long as you think of the right maxim, they can be made to look okay. There's a famous paper called Testing My New Sword that explores this. So there's rule-based ethics. Then there's virtue-based ethics. So this is what you get from Aristotle. In Aristotle, but also now, because there was a revival of it. There was a famous paper called Modern Moral Philosophy by Elizabeth Anscombe, which really brought Aristotle and virtue ethics roaring back to life. And the idea there is that rather than asking what the rule is for some situation, you don't think about situations, you think about character. So the primary object of evaluation is character. What are the virtues? What kind of people should we be trying to become? I mean, Aristotle's answers are all to do with the virtues that you need in order to be an ancient Greek gentleman. But this isn't ancient Greece, and being a gentleman isn't the most important thing for us, even if it's possible for us. So our list of virtues may be different. Nevertheless, there is life in this. So that if you're then looking at situations and you ask, what should you do? Well, the answer is to ask, well, what does the virtuous person do? Right? And this gives you a kind of grip on people's motivations, because you can ask somebody, well, what kind of person are you trying to become? What kind of person do you take yourself to be? Nobody wants to think of themselves as a bad person. Nobody wants to think of themselves as lacking in important virtues, right? So virtue ethics can maybe get a grip on people's motives in a way that rule-based ethics can't. The last kind of ethics I want to offer you is casuistry, or case-based ethics. And this was the way ethics was thought about through the Middle Ages. So it's a bit like case law. So if you have a moral dilemma, you aren't sure what to do, you look for relevantly similar cases where you do know what to do, and then because they're relevantly similar, you carry the same argument across, and then that tells you what to do in the new case. So if you think about, this is very often how people argue in practical ethics. So if you're less concerned with figuring out what is morality, what is the logical order, what is the metaphysical order of ethics as such, and you're just trying to decide what to do in the world, it can be more used to say, well, look, here is a case where we do know what to do, we do know what to say. Let's try and argue from that to a resolution to some more difficult case. And this is what Judith Jarvis Thompson does in the case that that you have in Porter, where so she's making an argument about abortion, and she says, well, imagine another case where you had a famous violinist who was only able to survive because they were cabled up to your body, right? There were tubes connecting the famous violinist's body with yours. The famous violinist's body is only kept alive because of these connections. Do you have an obligation to put up with this? And the answer seems to be fairly obviously no, because your body is your body, and that while you shouldn't kill people, you're not obliged to sustain somebody else in life at that cost. And she thinks that, well, on that basis, you can make a case in favour of the permissibility of abortion. She thinks that the case of the pregnant woman and the fetus is relevantly similar to this case that she imagines. Of course, this doesn't go without challenge. Our aim now is not to think about whether her argument is successful, is just to think about the structure of the argument that she's trying to make, that she doesn't look for the rule. She doesn't ask Kant to supply a maxim. She doesn't look to utilitarianism to apply a general rule like maximize utility. Nor does she ask what the virtuous person would do. I mean, there's all kinds of virtues that have a bearing. But which virtues you think have a bearing on this? I mean, autonomy is a virtue, but at the same time, there are virtues of parenthood. There are what you might call parental or maternal virtues. Maybe that if you can decide which of those virtues are the most important, then you probably already kind of decided the case. So she argues it by casuistry, by comparison of relevantly similar cases. That's how people argue in common law. So you have precedents, and you try and argue that your legal case should go one way or the other because it's relevantly similar to established precedent, and you can do that in ethics as well. Okay, so those are a range of different kinds of argument. We had the kind of contextualizing, distinguishing and relating arguments in history and literary criticism. We had this thought that the exact sciences, like principally physics, work by isolating events from their context. You don't ask whether these subatomic particles are in the US or Russia or Switzerland, or whether the particles have met before, or whether they're meeting on purpose. You strip away all that. And finally, we had these thoughts about ethics. So if you think that these are three radically different ways of investigating questions, then maybe you're edging towards the idea that there's three different metaphysical orders. On the other hand, if you think that ultimately logic is logic and that what we're doing is avoiding contradiction, in all these cases, you strip away the local color, and what you're doing ultimately is striving to avoid contradiction. And for that reason, logic is logic regardless of what you're talking about. Then that might push you towards the idea that metaphysically we should be monists. So that's what's at stake. All right. Talk to you soon.